he is trying to do is show us what the nature of society is and how it holds the potential for change. So, the ideas, for instance, of false consciousness and that we talked about when we looked at the nature of reality under critical social science, it's something that we can attribute to the ideas of Marx. Now, I think much of what we've been discussing and in the context of order, we've been saying that social order is a sort of given, and we're trying to, as sociologists, we're trying to understand what is it that is behind this order, what makes this order possible. So in that context, we examined several sort of conceptual and theoretical ideas, and conflict theory is one such. Now, when you say conflict, then it's a kind of it's the opposite of order in some senses. It suggests to us that there's a lack of order. So, so if I think uh, um, of a functionalist perspective, a perspective that looks at the functions of any social institution, any sort of social relationship, uh, that is the functionalist view. So when I say, what are the functions of the family? What does it help achieve in society? That I'm taking the functionalist perspective. Now, from a functionalist perspective, one would think that even conflict has a function in society, right? But when we look at Marx's theories, we see that he places conflict at sort of the heart of social interactions, at the heart of what society really is. So in his theory, if one wants to understand what society is, if one wants to understand um, how relations between people are maintained, what this sort of web of relationships is, we have to look at conflict. We have to understand that behind all of this is social conflict. So one of his sort of defining statements then has been that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. So class struggle, conflict, these are words that he uses again and again. Um, so, yeah, we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So for Marx, the term class is really about your attachment to a person's attachment to a particular social group, in which all the members have the same relationship to the forces of production. So now, so when we talk of production, we there are two aspects that he refers to: um, the relations of production and the means of production. Right? Relations of production are the relations, for instance, between the people who are involved in production. So you see, the very beginning of the ideas that he's discussing lies um, in this process of production of commodities. So if one thinks of what is it that makes society, and again, you are referring to, he's referring largely to the capitalist society. That's the time that he's writing. It's a time of industrialization, and sort of capitalism has taken sort of deep roots in society. And it's in this context that he's writing. So, but he's writing also in terms of the different epochs in history, the different eras in history, and thinking about what the sort of shifts have been. And he says that even if one were to look at this kind of look at the history and think about the different phases through which society has been through, you can see that this relationship of people to the means of production is important in shaping the idea of class and in shaping the idea of class conflict. So the one of the sort of initial stages, the first stages of society is the epoch of primitive communism. And in primitive communism, it's based on a communal mode of production, which means that there isn't the idea of individual ownership. It is a subsistence economy, and for him, the primitive communism presents the idea is really about a kind of classless society. So it doesn't have this kind of what we think of the division of society into classes. Now, now, one of the things that he's clearly articulated is the idea of dual classes. So he's not looking, so in a sense, a simplified version of the stratification that we see in our society is to think about your relationship, a person's relationship to the means of production, whether the person is an owner or a non-owner of the means of production, will determine their place in class. So the owners are the bourgeois, the non-owners are the proletariat. What the proletariat have is the ability to sell their labor power. So these two classes, the owners and the non-owners, are essentially in an antagonistic relationship with each other. And you can see that again, in different societies, not just in under industrial capitalism. So whether it's so before industrial capitalism, you had you have feudal society in which you can see this relationship between lord and serf, or in ancient society where you can see this relationship between the masters and the slaves. So during each historical epoch, you can observe the antagonistic relationship between the two major classes based on the ownership to means of production. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the proletariat, because it does not own any means of production, the only way the proletariat can survive is by depending on their labor power. So they have the capacity to, the only thing that they own is their ability to sell their labor, is their labor power. So they depend on wages and depend on those who are paying these wages. So so if you think about the capitalist and the nature of capital is such that it is money that produces more money. So in the sense that it's if you've invested in a certain amount, by the time the process of production and and exchange, production, distribution is complete, you would end up with a slightly larger amount. So and then that larger amount is reinvested back, and again the process continues, you get an even larger amount. So this is the nature of capital, that it produces more money. And the starting point is this circulation of commodities, which means, and here, labor is as much a commodity as, for instance, the raw materials. And what is happening in the process of production is that you're seeing the circulation of commodities. Next slide, please. So, so this M1C to M2, which is what I just explained, where money is invested in the production process, and it at the end of the process you have M2, you have more money than what you started out with. So the circulation, the capitalist circulation of commodities is is really about producing more money. And so you are putting commodities in the market in order to be able to generate profit. Now it's important to understand that what is it that generates the profit. I think we talked about this a little bit in the last class, where I said that it is the power of labor to be able to generate a surplus that that enables this profit making undertaken by the capitalist. Now, the capitalist owns the means of production. In this case, labor is a means of production. The capitalist, by virtue of paying wages, begins to own labor power. So the labor is something um, uh, that the proletariat has to sell, and however, it is not because of the way in which the capitalist process and the system is structured. It is not up to not up to labor and not up to the proletariat to be able to decide the price for its labor, right? So the price, in a sense, is again because is dictated because of the fact that labor is totally dependent, proletariat is totally dependent on this labor power to earn a living, to survive, and so on. So, so this is what creates a kind of, we can move to the next slide. This is what creates a kind of exploitative situation and between these two classes, between the capitalist, between the bourgeois and the proletariat. And yeah, so the surplus value, as I said, is the difference between the value of the product that is sold and the value of the elements which composed, which were used in the making of the product. So the power of labor is one such element in the making of the product, and what he says is that labor is what has this capacity to produce the surplus of because of the way in which labor time is used. So how does it produce the surplus? It produces the surplus because the capitalist pays the labor, let's say, for 8 hours of work, but is able to get labor to do, let's say, 9 hours of work. And in that sort of additional time, labor is able to produce a surplus, but the capitalist is not necessarily paying for that surplus. So that is one. The other is that this capacity that labor has to generate a profit is not something. This profit is not something that is shared with labor. It is only reinvested into the again into the capitalist process to be able to generate more and more profit. So over a period of time, there is an accumulation of profit, which is really beneficial not for labor, but for the bourgeois, not for the proletariat, but for the bourgeois class. And again, over a period of time, this means that the gap between the capitalist and the worker only increases. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this also we have discussed. The next one. Yeah, so as I said, this is what creates class conflict. Now, in terms of class conflict, Marx also distinguished between a class in itself and the idea of a class in itself and a class for itself. When you look at the class in itself, according to him, it is a social grouping whose members will share the same relationship to the means of production. But this is not a class in the fullest sense of the term. So that's why he uses the term class for itself. And this class for itself is a class that when the members achieve class consciousness. They have a full awareness of who they are, what this relationship is to the means of production, and what it is doing to their lives. And so there is a sense of achieving class consciousness and solidarity, and a full awareness of the situation of exploitation and oppression. Now, it is when the class becomes a class for itself that it is able to develop a common identity. It is able to recognize that all the members have shared interest. It is able to also then unite, and this leads to cohesion. This leads to class cohesion. Now, so for Marx, it's very important that the class moves from a position of being a class in itself to being a class for itself. Because when it becomes a class for itself, that is when it can have revolutionary potential. That is when it can become a revolutionary class. Revolutionary class meaning what? It means that it has the capacity to change the nature of society. It has the capacity to address this exploitation, this antagonism between two classes. So here again, you see the idea of change. When we began, we said, okay, if we look at Marx, he would fall broadly within the critical social science approach. So he's trying to understand society, not merely to understand it, but to think about how it can change. So two things, conflict and change, were at the heart of what are at the heart of Marx's ideas of society. So this change is possible when the proletariat develops this class consciousness. And if what's interesting is that the class in itself is a kind of false consciousness. You remember the idea of false consciousness when we talked about the different kinds of realities. So here you may belong to a particular class, but you have internalized the norms of being in that class, norms of belonging in that class. You don't begin to question or understand what is behind these relations, or these exploitative relations. Whereas when you become a class for itself, you then understand you develop this sense of solidarity. You understand the nature of your exploitation and oppression, and that is what creates cohesion among individual members. Now, next slide, please. Oops. Okay, sorry. All right. Yeah. So leave it at this, and then I can. So what happens then is, we're talking then about the kind of change that is possible in society, in industrial society, and Marx says that when you think of these class antagonisms, this class conflict, it creates contradictions within the capitalist system. Now, what is the contradiction? The contradiction is that the means of production will keep advancing because, if you think of labor will, will be trained, will be able to do different things, so that labor as a commodity will undergo change. Similarly, all the other means of production will also undergo change. So when you think of capitalist expansion, newer geographical areas will be brought into the capitalist fold. Machines will change, technology will change. So all these, what you call the means of production, will undergo sort of change, but the relations of production, which is the relation between the capitalist and the worker, that remains unchanged. That remains exploitative. So the capitalist can only continue the system when this exploitation is there. And according to Marx, over a period of time, this becomes a central contradiction in capitalist society. And and it is this contradiction that can then bring about change. And Marx is saying this actually for all societies. So if you look at the stage before industrialism, which is feudalism, there too the exploitative nature or the exploitative relations become a fetter, become an obstacle for the further development of society. And that's when a change emerges in society. So his theory really was also based on this capacity to predict. He's saying that, there's a predictive aspect to what he's saying, which is that as capitalism will develop and there is a realization of this internal contradiction, this inherent contradiction, then there will be change. And for him, what is the change going to be? The change will be that the working class or the proletariat will become a revolutionary force, will ultimately take recourse to revolutionary violence in order to make production much more of a social enterprise, and in order to do away with the exploitation of the proletariat and the shared grievances. So, so class struggle would ultimately overthrow the capitalist order, and private property would be replaced by communally owned property. So even though industrial manufacturing sort of remains the main sort of the basis of how production operates, this will happen through communally owned processes, through communally owned resources and practices and so on. So you see here that the two aspects, one is that class conflict is central to society. The second, that that when you think of class in society, you think of a dual class theory, and that is sort of unique in a sense to Marx, because several others would talk about sort of, and if you look at society in general, we can think of different classes. It's not just a simple dual, it's not just a simple division of two classes. But I think there's a point that he was trying, clearly there is a point that he was trying to make when he refers to this this kind of theorizing in terms of two classes, which is that he's bringing it down to the basic element. And the basic element is, what is your relationship to owners of, to means of production? Are you an owner or a non-owner? So in a sense, again, it is an ideal typical construct with which we learn to see what society is like and what is holding it together. So if one thinks of the phase in society before the proletariat reaches its revolutionary potential, it's actually this this exploitative hold over the proletariat by the capitalists that keeps society together. And once it reaches its revolutionary potential, again, there is a collapse of order in a sense, because there is violence, and it is only possible to make a new society, according to Marx, with this kind of violent overthrow. So now, in contrast to Marx, Weber adds two other dimensions to understanding stratification, and I'm not going to go into it much, but the two other dimensions are prestige and power. So so if so he really looks at, according to Weber, there is class, there is status, and there is party. So he understands that if you want to look at classes, or you want to look at stratification in society, simply thinking about ownership of means ownership or non-ownership of property is not enough. So that's one aspect where property differences generates classes, but differences in prestige will mean that there are different status grouping. So if one thinks of professional status and how differences in prestige tied to professions, there are status groupings. Then he says there are power differences, and so here you have parties or political blocs, and those power differences then lead to what are called parties. So according to Weber, then it's not you know. It's not a certainty, it's that it's just economic classes that will constitute communities. And he says that in fact, status groups who who are united on the basis of certain common degrees of social prestige, they're far more likely to constitute status groups. So Weber can be seen as a kind of critique to Marxist theory of class, because he introduces these two other aspects, which is status and power in understanding sort of classes. Yeah, I think that's about it. So if you, it's important to then also locate this in the context of our larger objective in the course, because in terms of where the ideas of Karl Marx fit in, and unfortunately we don't have time to cover the sort of shift in capitalism, and if you look at sort of more contemporary ideas of how capitalism has evolved, and the idea that the way in which Marx had perceived or had predicted society will become, that has not really happened. So the shift from the capitalist sort of mode of production to a socialist mode of production has not really happened. So the only sort of example that we have where this was attempted was in Soviet Russia, and we all know the way in which that system actually collapsed and failed. So what has happened then with new technology and with the coming in of ICT, information communication technology, is that what you have is now have surveillance capitalism. So you have the use of new technology to further capitalism in very different kinds of ways. So you have ideas of, let's say, surveillance capitalism. You have ideas of the gig economy or the platform economy, where you can then see the the various ways in which capitalism has sort of molded itself, or the system has molded itself as it sort of deals with the advancements in technology and so on. But in some senses, the idea of dual classes, the idea of who is it that owns the means of production, who is it that owns, in the context of ICT, who is it that owns information? These become then questions of help us to understand questions of social order, the question of how social order is being maintained. So I think I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, we can take them. So if you don't have any questions, we will, well, the quiz is only supposed to begin at 9, right? I don't think we can do it before 9. So we can just wait till 9, Vaibhav, is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so you can take this time to just go through your, you have about 15 minutes to just go through the gender slides maybe, and then we will open the quiz. How many of you are here? We have about 40 students, okay. So in the next class, we will just do a wrap up. I'll just go through whatever we did so far and the progression of the classes. And if you have any questions, of course, there's the next class, but there's also the tutorials. We have been there last week as well, and we'll be there this week as well to address any questions that you have. And the tutorials are also a good space to discuss your video projects for, I don't know how many of you are doing it. But you can also, because then that's a better space to talk about the video projects and your ideas, and we can help you with them. So yeah, so for the next 15 minutes, you can just go through your gender slides and we will open the quiz at 9.